On October 14, 1992, a single gunshot in a Houston gas station parking lot ended the life of Andrew Lastrapes Jr. It was a brutal, senseless murder over a wallet containing about $50. But it was also the beginning of a story that would not end for another 12 years, with a state-sanctioned execution. The victim, a 34-year-old husband and father, was in the final moments of a routine day. He was a man whose life was measured in the quiet, ordinary moments that form the bedrock of a family, his mind likely on the comfort of home. In a flash of violence, all of that was erased. The quiet routines, the future anniversaries, the graduations he would never attend, all of it was stolen. This act of violence set in motion a story that would ripple far beyond the confines of that parking lot. A story of a justice system under scrutiny and the almost unbelievable power of human forgiveness. The investigation that followed moved with grim efficiency. Police quickly zeroed in on a group of young men involved in a string of robberies, and from that group, one name was pushed to the forefront: Dominique Jerome Green. At only 18 years old, he was identified as the trigger man, the central figure in a tragedy that had captured the city's attention. The state of Texas, with a trail of evidence and testimony from accomplices, saw a clear path to a conviction and a death sentence. On the surface, the narrative was tragically simple. A good man was murdered, and a violent young killer was brought to justice. But beneath this official story, a far more complex and disturbing picture began to emerge. Questions about the evidence, the legal representation, and the startling disparities in the fates of the other young men involved began to cast a long shadow of doubt. The most profound challenge to the state's version of events, however, would come from a place no one could have predicted. The loudest calls to save Dominique Green from execution would not come from activists or lawyers, but from the widow and son of Andrew Lastrapes Jr. himself, forcing us to confront a chilling and profound question. What happens when the family of a murder victim forgives the killer, but the state still demands death? In the immediate aftermath of Andrew Lastrapes Jr.'s murder, the city of Houston demanded justice, and a sprawling manhunt was launched. Detectives from the Houston Police Department worked relentlessly, piecing together the chaotic fragments of that violent night. The investigation quickly linked the shooting to a string of armed robberies that had occurred in the area, creating a profile of a group of young men on a reckless and dangerous crime spree. The crucial breakthrough came from the discovery of the stolen car used as the getaway vehicle. It was found abandoned, and inside, investigators uncovered the single most important piece of physical evidence: the Tech 9 semi-automatic pistol that had fired the fatal shot. With the murder weapon secured, the net began to tighten around the individuals involved. Following a trail of witness statements and street-level intelligence, the investigation zeroed in on 4 names: Recess Ekpen, Gregory Riley, Benny Earl Baspt Jr., and a quiet 18-year-old, Dominique Jerome Green. While all were considered suspects, the full weight of the investigation soon fell upon Green. His accomplices, facing the immense pressure of a capital murder charge, began to cooperate with authorities, their testimonies painting Dominique as the leader and the one who held the gun. To understand how an 18-year-old found himself at the center of such a brutal crime, one must look beyond the events of that single night and into the harsh realities of his upbringing. Dominique Green was a product of Houston's 5th Ward, a neighborhood where poverty was generational and opportunity was scarce. His childhood was not a time of innocence, but a grueling lesson in survival, marked by instability, neglect, and trauma. He navigated a world without a safety net, where the allure of street life offered a dangerous, yet tangible sense of belonging that was absent elsewhere. His path was a quiet spiral downward, a journey through a system that often fails to see a child in crisis until it's too late. This context of a troubled past does not excuse the crime, but it does force us to confront a difficult question. How much should a person's traumatic background be considered when they stand accused of a violent act? Let us know your thoughts on this complex issue in the comments below. The state of Texas saw a killer, but the full story was that of a young man shaped by forces far beyond his control, a boy who was now about to face the full, unyielding power of the American justice system. The trial and the doubt. In the sweltering Houston summer of August 1993, Dominique Green was brought before the Harris County Courthouse to stand trial for his life. The courtroom was a theater of immense tension, where the weight of a man's life hung in the balance. The prosecution, confident and methodical, opened its case with formidable precision. Step by step, they constructed a narrative of a cold, calculated crime, painting Green not as a wayward teen, but as the ruthless leader of a dangerous crew. They paraded his accomplices, Michael Neal and Paul Lyman, to the stand. Under plea deals that spared them from facing the death penalty, they testified against Green, their accounts varying in minor details, but unified on the most critical point. Dominique was the one holding the Tech-9 pistol that night. To the jury, their testimony was damning, a chorus of voices from within the crime itself, pointing to one man. The state's case was anchored by the murder weapon found in the car Green was driving. A ballistics expert from the Houston Police Department Crime Lab delivered a confident, unequivocal testimony, stating that the bullet that killed Andrew Lastrapes Jr. was a perfect match to that specific gun. The message to the jury was clear and simple. The man, the weapon, and the crime were inextricably linked. The defense, faced with this mountain of evidence, was outmatched. They attempted to present a counter-narrative, portraying Green as a troubled youth with a history of untreated mental illness, a follower shaped by a life of neglect who had fallen in with the wrong crowd. They argued that while he was present, he was not the triggerman, a desperate plea to cast reasonable doubt on his direct culpability for the murder itself. But their arguments struggled to gain traction against the prosecution's seemingly airtight case. What the jury never knew, however, were the critical flaws lurking just beneath the surface of the state's certainty. Green's court-appointed legal team was later heavily criticized for being inadequate and ineffective, failing to challenge the prosecution's evidence with the rigor required in a capital case. More alarmingly, the Houston PD Crime Lab, the very institution whose testimony sealed Green's fate, would be exposed years later in a massive, nationwide scandal. The lab was found to have engaged in systemic misconduct, with cases of contamination, shoddy work, and falsified results that called hundreds of convictions into question. The perfect ballistics match that condemned a teenager to death was produced by a deeply flawed and unreliable system. But in 1993, the jury heard none of this. After a short deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty of capital murder. Dominique Green stood motionless as the judge delivered the sentence: death by lethal injection. With the bang of a gavel, he was no longer a teenager from the Fifth Ward. He was property of the state, condemned to die based on a story that was far from complete. Transferred to the infamous Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas, Dominique Green began the longest and final chapter of his life: the wait on death row. For over a decade, his world shrank to the suffocating dimensions of a concrete cell, a place designed to strip away identity and hope. Yet, within these confines, an extraordinary transformation began to take place. The lost, impulsive teenager who entered the system started to recede, replaced by a man immersed in a deep and painful process of introspection and repentance. Guards and prison staff, men who were trained to be cynical, remembered him as an anomaly, a calm, polite, and orderly inmate who spent his 23 hours of daily lockdown devouring books on law, philosophy, and religion. He filled countless journals with his thoughts, grappling with the choices he had made, the life he had been a part of taking, and the man he was trying to become. This wasn't a performance, it was a quiet, consistent journey inward. He became an unlikely source of stability on the row, helping illiterate inmates draft letters to their families and offering counsel to those struggling with the immense psychological pressure of their sentence. His profound change did not go unnoticed. Through his writings, he connected with anti-death penalty advocates, including the world-renowned Archbishop Desmond Tutu. After visiting Green in 2004, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate was so moved that he described Dominique as a wonderful advertisement for God, a testament to the human capacity for change and redemption. But the most powerful validation of his repentance came from the last people on earth from whom he could ever expect it. The family of Andrew Lastrapes Jr., led by his widow Bernat and son Andre, had embarked on their own arduous journey, not toward vengeance, but toward grace. Through their faith, they found it within themselves to forgive Dominique Green for the irreparable harm he had caused. This forgiveness was not a quiet, private affair. It became a public and passionate plea for his life. The Lastrapes family actively campaigned to have his death sentence commuted, arguing that another killing would not honor Andrew's memory or bring their family peace. This incredible act of grace raises one of the deepest questions our justice system can face. If the family most harmed by a crime finds the strength to offer forgiveness and plead for mercy, should the state still have the power to demand the ultimate price? If this story is making you think about the true meaning of justice, hit the like button so more people can find it. And make sure you subscribe, because we are committed to exploring these difficult questions together. As Dominique Green's execution date of October 26, 2004, drew near, the legal battle for his life entered its final, frantic hours. The case had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a moral crisis that had captured the world's attention. A bombshell discovery had recently emerged. 280 uncatalogued boxes of evidence were found languishing in the Houston Police Department's crime lab, a chaotic archive of potential miscarriages of justice. Green's legal team launched an emergency appeal, arguing that his execution would be unlawful until this mountain of mismanaged evidence could be inventoried. What if something in those boxes could corroborate his claim of not being the shooter? A district judge, acknowledging the profound implications, granted a temporary stay of execution, a fleeting moment of hope. But the machinery of the Texas justice system, once set in motion, is incredibly difficult to stop. Within hours, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals swiftly overturned the stay, and the U.S. Supreme Court, the last hope, denied a final appeal. The doors of the law were now firmly shut. Simultaneously, the moral and ethical appeals reached a fever pitch. The pleas from the Lastrapes family grew more desperate, their calls for mercy echoing in letters to the governor. Archbishop Desmond Tutu lent his immense global standing, pleading with the state to recognize the profound transformation Green had undergone. Yet, these powerful appeals to conscience fell on deaf ears. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, the body tasked with recommending clemency, voted 5-1 against it. Governor Rick Perry, citing the jury's original verdict, refused to intervene. The state had made its decision, a decision that stood in stark, chilling opposition to the expressed wishes of the victim's own family. The system, it seemed, had a momentum all its own. one that couldn't be swayed by forgiveness, doubt, or even the potential of its own fallibility. The final day had arrived. On the morning of his execution, Dominique was transferred from the Polunsky unit to the Walls unit in Huntsville, home of the Texas execution chamber. The 1-hour journey marks the final transition from a life of waiting to the certainty of death. Those who witnessed him in his final hours described a man who was not filled with rage or fear, but with a profound and steady calm. He met with his spiritual advisor. His final meal was a standard prison offering, and he spent his last moments not in protest, but in quiet reflection. As evening descended, the witnesses gathered behind the glass, journalists, prison officials, and, in a final, heart-rending act of grace, members of the Lastrapes family. They were not there to see vengeance done, but to bear witness to the end of a life they had fought to save. At 6:45 p.m., Dominique Green was escorted into the chamber. He walked calmly, his face composed, and lay down on the gurney without resistance. As the IV lines were inserted into his arms, he was asked if he had any last words. Lifting his head slightly, his voice clear and steady, he spoke. "I am not angry," he began, "but I am disappointed that I was denied justice. But I am happy that I was afforded you all as family and friends. I love you all. Please keep my memory alive." He then expressed his gratitude to the Lastrapes family for their forgiveness. At 7:09 p.m., the lethal dose of drugs began to flow. 9 slow breaths later, he was still. He was pronounced dead at 7:23 p.m. The execution of Dominique Green did not end his story. It immortalized its contradictions. In the years that followed, his case became a powerful symbol for the deep flaws within the American death penalty system. It reignited fierce debates over Texas's law of parties, which allows a person to be sentenced to death for a murder they did not physically commit. His story is now a staple in law schools and ethics classes, a case study in the collision between legal procedure and moral justice. In 2006, author Thomas Cahill published A Saint on Death Row, a book that detailed Green's incredible transformation and brought his story of repentance to an international audience. The aftermath solidified what his supporters had claimed all along, that the boy who was sentenced to die was not the man who was executed. So what is the lesson we are left with? The story of Andrew Lastrapes Jr. and Dominique Green is a summary of our justice system's greatest strengths and its most terrifying weaknesses. It is a story that begins with a senseless act of violence that rightfully demanded accountability, but it evolved into a profound exploration of human fallibility. The fallibility of a young man who made a terrible choice, of a legal system that relied on flawed evidence and inadequate counsel, and perhaps the fallibility of a society that believes the only response to killing is more killing. The true heart of this story lies in the extraordinary actions of the Lastrapes family, who chose a path of restorative justice over retributive justice. They sought healing, not vengeance. They offered forgiveness, a gift the state of Texas was legally incapable of accepting. This forces us to rethink the very purpose of our legal system. Is it merely a mechanism for punishment? An engine of retribution that, once started, cannot be stopped? Or should it have the capacity for mercy, the ability to recognize profound human change, and the wisdom to listen when the victims themselves say that another death is not the answer? Dominique Green's life and death leave us with one final, haunting question that we must all consider. If the ultimate goal of justice is to heal the wounds of a community, what do we call a system that, in its unyielding quest for retribution, ignores the compassionate pleas of the very family it claims to serve? Drop your thought in the comments section. Also, do like and subscribe for more.